Hello everyone, I'm Gigafo, and today is the day before all of these Darkmoon Faire cards get revealed. And I thought it was the perfect time to review the ones that we already know. But before we get into it, I just want to say thank you so much if you're coming back as a returning viewer, or even if you're new. Thank you so much for coming. I will have content for each of these cards weekly. So every week around this time, I should have a video covering the new cards that are revealed. So be sure to stay tuned for that. And without further ado, let's get into the cards. So the first Darkmoon Faire card we have here is Day at the Fair, which is a 3-mana paladin spell that reads, summon 3 Silverhand recruits, corrupt, summon 5. Now this is where we have to introduce the corrupt mechanic, which reads, upgrades in hand after you played a card that costs more. To give you an example of that, say you play Day at the Fair on turn 3 on curve, it's going to summon 3 Silverhand recruits, which isn't that great. Now if you play a 4 mana or greater card before you play this one, it upgrades in hand, becoming a spell that summons 5 Silverhand recruits, which is obviously much better. This mechanic is a bit of a hit or miss mechanic for me, because the impact of waiting to play something off curve is very significant. Like, waiting to play this card on turn 5 or even later, the impact of having 5 1/1s lessens as the game goes on. All in all, I don't really see where this card could see play. There isn't really any Silverhand recruit synergy or even any sort of archetype that would want this card at all. It just seems kind of out of place right now. But if there is any Silverhand recruit synergy in this expansion, we could see it, because it's like the one other Silverhand recruit card other than like Air Raid. So if there is a Silverhand recruit archetype, this is going to be in it. But if it does happen, I don't think it'll be very good even. Next up we have Fortune Teller, a 5-mana 3/3 priest mech that reads, taunt, battle cry, gain +1/+1 for each spell in your hand. This is a very interesting effect, especially for Priest, because Priest isn't really known for big stat bombs in the mid-game. They're usually more utility-based, like Convincing Infiltrator, and this card kind of seems to betray that philosophy of where Priest is currently at right now. That said, I don't see this getting a spot in Control Priest because of that very reason. It doesn't provide enough utility for it to edge out its competition, such as I said, Convincing Infiltrator. But and I know it's a bit of a stretch, but where I do see this having a bit of potential is in Tempo Priest, with like Sethic Veilweaver and Frazzle Freshman, that sort of archetype, where maybe even you have the quest and you're healing and you're buffing your minions, and then this could be like a top end of the curve kind of deal. It's interesting, but I don't think it'll pan out with the cards that we already know. Next we have Fleethoof Pearltusk, a neutral 5-mana 4/4 beast that reads, rush, corrupt, gain +4/+4. Now I think this is the first good corrupt card, because of synergies we'll see later. As it is, it's still okay. It's not great, it's a bit slow. Especially at 5 mana, you have to corrupt it by playing a 6-mana card, and oftentimes that's just too slow for most decks. Then again, the impact of gaining +4/+4 is significant, and it might just be significant enough to be played in Highlander decks that may not have corrupt synergy. Now that I think about it, it is better than Ruststeed Raider, so maybe it'll replace that in some Highlander decks. Next up is Dunk Tank, a Shaman 4-mana spell that reads, deal 4 damage, corrupt, then deal 2 damage to all enemy minions. I just see this card fitting pretty neatly into Control Shaman or Highlander Shaman. It's a pretty solid card. It's pretty much an upgraded version of Swipe, the Druid spell, and it can go face, which is neat. Probably not that significant, but it's pretty neat if you can get it buffed with spell damage. Okay, next up is Guess the Weight, a 2-mana druid spell that reads, draw a card, guess if your next card costs more or less to draw it. This one is really good. I think I might be overestimating it, but I still think it's really good. I think it'll be put into a lot of druid decks. It doesn't even need that much workaround to be played. I mean, if you know your deck well enough, this almost always draws you 2 cards for 2 mana, which is really good. So, yeah, I see this one working out. It will definitely see play in a lot of druid decks, because it's just a all-around good draw spell for druid. Next up, we have the first of the old gods, N'Zoth, God of the Deep. A 10 mana neutral legendary, 5/7 stats that says, Battlecry, resurrect a friendly minion of each minion type. This one is very interesting, because it needs a bit of working around, like deck building. You need to include an elemental, you need to include a beast, mech, and all the minion types you can get. And it poses a deck building challenge, but one that's probably pretty easy to circumvent because of new cards like Fleethoof Pearltusk, and one I'm gonna get to later. This card will probably see play in Highlander decks, which can take advantage of the varied minion pool because of their 30 card layout. I don't think this one will see too much play, but it's gonna be around. I mean, you're gonna see it every so often. Okay, next up is Yogg Saron, Master of Fate, a 10 mana 7/5 neutral legendary that reads, Battlecry, if you've cast 10 spells this game, spin the Wheel of Yogg Saron. And you might be wondering, hey, what does that do? What does the Wheel of Yogg Saron do? Well, let's take a look at the effects of the wheel. Okay, so there are 6 effects on the Wheel of Yogg Saron, and here they all are. One is Curse of Flesh, which fills the board with random minions and gives yours a rush. Next is Hand of Fate, which fills your hand with random spells that cost 0 this turn. Next is Mystery Box, an effect that casts random spells for each spell you've cast this game, which is pretty much Yogg's old effect. Then there is Devouring Hunger, which destroys all other minions and gains their attack and health. And then there's Mind Flayer Goggles, which takes control of 3 random enemy minions. And I'm not going to mention the last one yet, because each of the 5 that I did mention have a 19% chance of happening. Those are the odds of the wheel landing on each effect. And then there's Rod of Roasting, which is the last one. This one only has a 5% chance of happening, and there's a good reason for it, because the effect of Rod of Roasting is it casts Pyroblast until a player dies, where the targets are random. That is an insane effect. It ends the game right there on turn 10. Just because you played 10 spells and you got a 5% chance. You just end the game, and who knows who wins. Sure, you may have more health, but that doesn't really matter when it's random. This card is going to see ubiquitous play in control decks. No doubt about it. It's just so good. 10 spells is a minuscule requirement. Man, I can't wait to see this card in action. How healthy it is for the game is to be determined. I'm fully confident in giving Yogg Saron a 5-star rating right out of the gate. It's going to see tons of play. You're not going to be able to run into a control deck that doesn't include Yogg Saron. Next up, we have Silas Darkmoon, a 7 mana 4/4 neutral legendary that reads, Battlecry, choose a direction to rotate all minions. Now, if you've logged into Hearthstone recently, you should have this card already. It's the early access card for the expansion, like Sathavar and Archmage Antonidas, and most recently, Transfer Student. This card's effect is probably gonna be, like, second to Yogg Saron, probably the craziest effect of the expansion, because we've only seen this in story content. We've only seen this ability in single-player content. Like, swapping your minion with one of your opponents, it's absolutely ridiculous. And sure, it does come at a cost of 7 mana, but that is a cost nearly any deck is willing to pay. Putting this minion in your deck is usually not a wrong choice if your deck is minion heavy, or if your deck isn't minion heavy. I mean, giving your opponent a 4/4 for one of their heavy hitters is still good. It's kind of like a worse mind control, but at a discount of 3 mana. And that's super huge. That's so important. The one downside of mind control is that it takes up your whole turn. You take control of something, and then you pass. But with Sylas, you have 3 more mana left. And you get a 4/4 body in most cases. This card is very good. It has a unique and a powerful disruptive ability, and is good in pretty much any deck if you build the deck correctly. Next up is Yasiraj the Defiler. It's a 10 mana 10/10 neutral legendary that reads Battlecry, add a copy of each corrupted card you've played this game to your hand, and they cost 0 this turn. This is a super swingy effect. It adds corrupted cards to your hand, not corrupt cards, corrupted. They're in their upgraded form. So you'll get your 8/8s with Rush, you'll get your upgraded Dunk Tanks, you'll get your upgraded Day at the Fairs, if you run that for some reason. So this card is a huge board swing, just like N'Zoth, and I don't think it even needs to be in a corrupt deck. It's kind of like how if you have enough Invoke cards in a deck, you put in Galakrond, you put in enough Invoke cards, oh, might as well put in Kronks too, right? This is kind of the same way. You have enough corrupt cards, oh, I might as well put in Yasiraj the Defiler. It's a decent card in decks that don't really focus on corrupt, and an amazing payoff for corrupt decks, corrupt focused decks. So yeah, I think this card will see play in both those specific archetypes and just kind of other stuff like Highlander decks and whatnot. And here we have Cthulhu the Shattered, a 10 mana 6/6 neutral legendary that reads Start of game, break into pieces, and I'll explain what that means later. Battlecry, deal 30 damage randomly split among all minions. Now that is really a powerful effect, but you have to do some work to get it, and that work is not an easy task, and I'll show you why. Okay, so here are the pieces of Cthulhu, and how they work is that at the start of the game, Cthulhu shuffles 4 pieces into the deck, and these are the 4 pieces. And you have to play each of them to reform Cthulhu and shuffle it into your deck. And as you might guess, this is a very long and drawn-out process of drawing 5 mana spells and playing them, and then shuffling in Cthulhu, and you have to draw that one too. And let's just briefly look over what the pieces of Cthulhu are. There's the Body of Cthulhu, which summons a 6/6 with Taunt. There's Heart of Cthulhu, which deals 3 to all minions. And there's Eye of Cthulhu, which deals 7 damage randomly split among all enemies. And there's Maw of Cthulhu, which destroys a minion. All of these effects are subpar, kinda awkward, slow, except for maybe the 6/6 with Taunt. It's above base stats. It's pretty good. You're shuffling 4 subpar cards in your deck that you have to draw and then play, and then you have to draw the Cthulhu as well after you play all 4 of the pieces. What this deck needs is tutoring, serious card draw, or some sort of deck manipulation like Pull Kelp or whatnot. Or some sort of other synergy that I don't know about, like the Whispers of the Old Gods Cthulhu synergy. Maybe there's some sort of cards that'll draw pieces of Cthulhu or something. I mean, some pros to this are that you get 4 cards and eventually a 5th that add to your fatigue. So in control matchups, you'll win fatigue fairly significantly, because getting 5 cards in your deck is nice for a control deck. A control matchup. Once you draw Cthulhu, then you have to play a 10 mana card that isn't necessarily guaranteed for you to win the game, because it only does 30 damage randomly split. Let's say you're up against a Libram Paladin that has healed a bunch throughout the game and made a bunch of 8/8s with Divine Shield and Taunt and Argent Braggarts that are just as big. You're not going to kill the opponent. It's not very likely, at least. And this is why I really think that this card either needs to see some serious synergy come out in the next 2 weeks, or it's just going to be a dud archetype. And I hate to see that because it's such a cool concept. Next up is Darkmoon Rabbit, a 10 mana neutral beast that reads Rush and Poisonous, and also damages the minions next to whomever this attacks. That is a doozy of an effect for a 10 mana 1/1. It's basically like a 10 mana spell that kills 3 minions of like kinda your choice. And it's affected by taunt, which is also not great. But where this card shines is in resurrect decks, like N'Zoth, or even just Res Priest itself. Getting this card over and over, clearing your opponent's board over and over, might actually be good. Like, this card is a perfect fit for N'Zoth decks, taking up the beast slot in the all minion types. And in Res Priest, this is very consistent removal, getting it off of res effects. Sure, playing it is going to be a bit of a hassle for those priest decks, but it's definitely worth it. So a lot of people seem to say that this card is just a meme, and I think this is a unique idea that might come to fruition. Okay, now we have Solar Eclipse, a 2 mana druid spell that reads, your next spell this turn casts twice. This is really significant text. This can, say, double up buff spells like Savage Roar, Power of the Wild, Blessing of Ancients. This can double up draw spells like Guess the Weight. This can double up so many good things and just make them, well, twice as good. And especially with stuff like Savage Roar, that's so explosive. It's basically an upgraded Bloodlust, but it costs 2 cards. This is kind of a sleeper meta breaker in my opinion. Electra Storm Surge was a must play in Shaman for a while, and now they printed that, but 1 less mana for Druid of all classes. Maybe you can somehow manage to get this off with Survival of the Fittest and give everything +8/+8. That's just insane. Like, this card is incredible. I can't wait to see what people do with this, but most likely it's probably just going to be used to double up Savage Roar. So yeah, this one's really good. Keep an eye out on this one, and other druid spells. And now let's talk about its twin, Lunar Eclipse, a 2 mana druid spell that reads, deal 3 damage to a minion, your next spell this turn costs 2 less. I think this card is like so close to being better than Bogbeam, but it just isn't, because Bogbeam itself costs 0 mana when you're at 7 mana crystals, but this one always costs 2. You're never getting around that. But the next spell you cast costs 2 less, which is where the discount comes in. The discount here is delayed, where Bogbeam's discount is always there after 7 mana crystals. So in decks like the exotic Mount Seller token deck, Bogbeam will be favored over this card, because the upfront cost of Lunar Eclipse is just too much for that deck, for those explosive turn 7s. On the other hand, with stuff like Highlander Druid, Spell Druid, pretty much anything else, I think this will be pretty good, because Bogbeam wasn't already in those decks to begin with. I think this card can see play in those decks as just kind of a utility card that deals some damage and discounts some mana. Kind of like Nature Studies in that way, where it just does a thing and then discounts some mana. It's pretty nice. Definitely worse than Solar Eclipse, but still pretty good. And last but not least, we have Kiri, Chosen of Elune, a 4 mana 2/2 Druid Legendary that reads Battlecry, add a Solar Eclipse and Lunar Eclipse to your hand. This is a very solid card. You basically get to draw 2 cards without the penalty of reducing your deck's size. You just draw 2 cards that you want, and you don't have to go further into fatigue, which is nice. And you're guaranteed to get Solar and Lunar Eclipse, which is also nice. This card is going to be a must-play in a lot of slower Druid decks. Probably not in those aggro Druid decks, but in anything slower than that, it'll see play as pretty much a staple. Like, it'll be the Ziliax of Druid for a while, I think, until something better gets printed or until it rotates out. And that is gonna do it for the initial Madness at the Darkmoon Faire card review. There are 14 cards revealed right now, and there are going to be so much more within the next 2 weeks. And I'm super excited to see how this expansion pans out. I'm excited to share my opinions with you guys, and I'm excited for you guys to share my opinions with me in the comment section below. Wow, look what I did there. That was cool. Anyway, thanks for watching, especially so because I have not posted in a while, as you may have noticed. So it's especially great to see your support now, after so long. So thank you so much for sticking with me, and I'll catch you on the next one next week.